The oxygen tube slipped from my nose, my heartbeat dropped on the monitor, and exactly 37 seconds before the world narrowed to black. A voice, cold, metallic, inhuman, whispered into my ear, "This is your last breath, old man." That was how my Christmas Eve of 2024 ended. Not with family, not with warmth, but with a death sentence delivered by my own son. It sounds unreal, I know, like something pulled from the darkest corner of a movie. But it started with a single sentence I never imagined I would hear in my lifetime, Dad. I need control. And my single answer, a quiet, steady no, was the hammer that shattered my family like glass dropped on concrete. My name is Harold Beckett, 69. Widower, founder of a construction company in Winston-Salem, a man who built his life with cracked knuckles and unbroken integrity. My son Derek, the boy, I once believed would inherit everything I worked for, walked into my hospital room on Christmas Eve with a plan sharp enough to kill. Before I tell you what really happened during those 3 minutes and 14 seconds when I had to play unconscious just to stay alive, tell me, where are you watching from? And if you believe whispered justice is sharper than screamed justice, hit like and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Because if you think this kind of thing only happens in movies, let me drag you back into the night I realized my son no longer saw a father in the bed. He saw prey. Christmas Eve at Mercy General carries the kind of silence that chills bone. Not peaceful, not holy, but a silence stretched tight as if the entire hospital is waiting for something to break. Hallway lights flickered a dull yellow. Monitors blinked steady green, uncaring whether the person beneath them lived or vanished. Room 312. Bed by the window. Snow outside like dust on a forgotten world. Engines humming in the lot below, tiny ghosts rising from exhaust. While the city celebrated, I lay there with an oxygen line in my nose and saline dripping quietly into my arm. Sleep pulled at me, the kind of exhausted sleep that comes only after 50 years of pushing your body too far. Then the tightening, not a gasp, not fatigue, a crushing weight like someone pressing a plank across my chest with both hands. My eyes opened a fraction, just enough to see a shadow tower beside my bed. Derek. His silhouette stretched long under the overhead light. His left hand gripped the rail. His right hand held the tube that kept me breathing. Before thought caught up, the smell hit me, cheap whiskey mixed with the cologne Vanessa forced on him every Christmas. He leaned in, eyes red, breath unsteady, voice low, steady, practiced. "This is your last breath, old man." My blood didn't run cold. It froze. Then, with surgical calm, he loosened the oxygen tube. Not a tug, not shaking hands, precise. At the same time, Derek pressed the alarm mute button on the monitor. Not the system log, just the sound. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't rage, wasn't panic, wasn't a drunken mistake. This was intent. I wanted to sit up, to snatch the oxygen back, to scream. But survival speaks another language. So I obeyed it. I let my body go slack, eyelids heavy, muscles loose, breathing shallow through the corner of my lips, invisible, controlled. My hands slipped off the bed rail, slowly searching blindly. And then, a blessed shape under my fingertips. The emergency call button. One chance. I pressed. For 4 eternal seconds there was nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Only Derek breathing beside me, too calm for a son standing over his father's dying body. Then the door exploded open. Nurse Clara Boyd, Security Chief Robert Nash. Clara didn't scream, didn't freeze. She moved like steel. 2 seconds, oxygen reconnected. 3 more. Robert stepped between me and my son. No words, only the hiss of air flooding my lungs again, hot, burning, reviving. I coughed, a single, ragged cough. Derek stepped back, and that's when the performance began. Dad, you couldn't breathe. You scared me. Fake panic, fake innocence, fake tears. I had never been so ashamed to share blood with someone. Robert stared at him with the flat eyes of a former cop who's seen real criminals. "Sir, step out. Now." Derek opened his mouth but swallowed the words. He backed out of the room and vanished down the hall, leaving me breathing like a man dragged back from the edge of the river. The past hit me like a hammer. The scaffolding collapse in 2021. The worker who died. The the family destroyed, the settlement, the 6-month suspension I forced on Derek, not out of cruelty, out of justice. But to him, it was betrayal, humiliation, fuel, a slow-burning fire he fed for 3 years. And now in this freezing room, I finally saw what I had refused to admit. Derek didn't lose respect for me tonight. He lost it years ago. Clara placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Beckett, rest. I'll pull the logs." Robert added, "Your room is protected now. Nobody enters without my say." I nodded, but inside, something sharpened. If I didn't act, Derek would return. Next time, I wouldn't have an emergency button or 2 people to storm into the room. I curled my fingers into a fist, nails digging into skin, the hand of a father, becoming the hand of a survivor. In the cold silence, I whispered to myself, if I want to live, I need evidence. That was the moment the fight began. Quiet, precise, icy. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. That night after Derek was forced out of my room, I barely slept. Not because of fear, not because of pain, but because one question kept pounding in my head like a hammer striking concrete. How did it come to this? The morning of December 26th arrived with a thin, exhausted winter sun shining through the window of room 312. It wasn't warm. It didn't comfort. It simply stretched my shadow across the wall, the shadow of an old, stubborn man who wasn't ready to disappear. I pushed myself up slowly, leaning against the bed rail, feeling the cool stream of oxygen pulse into my lungs. Clara brought in my breakfast, same routine as every morning, but something in her eyes lingered longer this time. She set the tray down and exhaled softly. "Mr. Beckett, I'll check the system logs again. I promise." I nodded. I didn't need words. Some battles don't require shouting, only someone willing to stand on your side. When Clara left, I stared out the window where layers of snow covered the parking lot in thick white sheets. Cold, silent, heavy. And in that silence, memories rose, not nostalgia, but reminders of why I needed to survive this. I built Beckett Construction with my own hands back in the days when my fingers hadn't yet hardened from hauling stone and steel. I remembered standing on job sites at 5 a.m, the wind whipping my face, refusing to let myself step back. I remembered signing my first contract. My first completed house. The first staircase I ever inspected, watching my workers put in each nail like it meant something. Construction wasn't just a job. It was how I existed. My way out of a poor life into a life I could be proud of. But buildings weren't the only things I built. I built a family. And that family stood because of 3 pillars. Eleanor, the woman I believed no one could ever replace. She was the moral compass of our home. The one who told me, don't sign with anyone you don't trust. Don't let money blind you. And don't put the weight of your dreams on your children. If I was the wall, Eleanor was the foundation. If I was the road, she was the compass. Maybe that's why when she died, everything began to slide off its axis. Then there was Grace, my eldest. Strong, principled, kind enough to care, tough enough to stand alone when she needed to. She lived in Chicago working as an architect, called me every day. Not because I was lonely, but because she needed reassurance that the man she admired most was still himself. And then there was Derek. Derek wasn't like me, wasn't like Eleanor, and definitely wasn't like Grace. If Grace looked at buildings and saw how they could make the world better, Derek looked at them and saw how much profit they could bring. I've asked myself many times, was I the one who raised 2 children standing on opposite ends of a moral compass? Maybe, maybe not. But Derek was still my son, my only son. And I once believed that if I was patient enough, if I taught him the right things, if I trusted him, he would change. But on the morning of December 26th, as the winter sun scraped across the foot of my hospital bed, I knew I'd been wrong. Some cracks in a family aren't carved by time. They're carved by greed. And Derek had let that greed devour him from the inside. I reached for the small notepad on the bedside table and clicked my pen open, but didn't write yet. About 20 minutes later, Clara returned holding a printed sheet from the hospital entry system. "You weren't mistaken," she said. "The logs confirm it. 3:14 a.m. ID Derek Beckett, employee badge, patient access card, all captured in the system like footprints in fresh snow. You can mute sound, you can fake an expression, but you can't fake timestamps. What about the camera? I asked. Clara shook her head. One section was blocked by a rolling cart, but we've asked IT to restore the footage from the backup. I nodded. My body still felt weak, but my mind hadn't been this clear in years. Clara, I said quietly, firmly, don't call the police. Not yet. Her eyes widened. You want him to come back? I turned toward the window. Outside, snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, each flake dropping like a silent truth descending from the sky. I set him to dig his own grave. Clara didn't speak for several seconds. Then she nodded. Maybe no one understood my situation better than she did a woman who witnessed the moment a father was pushed to the threshold between life and death by his own son. After she left, I picked up the notepad again. My hand trembled not from age, but from a resolve so strong my body struggled to contain it. I wrote a single sentence, just 4 words. 4 words to remind myself not to soften, not to forgive blindly, not to die before the truth came out. Truth leaves a trail. I folded the note and tucked it into the bedside drawer, not to hide it, but to remind myself that what happened on Christmas Eve was not a nightmare. It was real. And the truth, like the snow falling outside, always finds its way to the ground. Slow, cold, silent, but inevitable. And I would be here to watch it appear. December 28th. The hospital was still hollow from the holiday lull. The Christmas trees in the hallways looked tired, their branches sagging as if they'd been awake for 3 nights straight. The golden lights trembled not from joy but from exhaustion. No more carols, no children laughing, just the lonely echo of nurses' footsteps down the 300 wing, like a hammer tapping against cold concrete. I sat upright back against the pillow, listening to the steady whisper of oxygen flowing through the tube. Every breath I took was a reminder that I was still alive and that someone had intended otherwise. I looked toward the doorway. At exactly 3 seconds before 9 a.m., a man appeared. Arthur Miles, my family attorney for 17 years. His charcoal wool suit was dusted with snow. A faint shadow under his eyes suggested he had spent half the night reading through documents, not because it was his job, but because he didn't want to lose a friend. He paused at the door like someone arriving at the scene of a tragedy. Harold. His voice dropped low. I got a call last night. We have a problem. I answered slowly. Probably more than one. Arthur pulled a chair closer, sat down and opened his leather briefcase. He placed a thick stack of papers on the little hospital tray. The sound of it hitting the wood was sharp enough that I imagined the paper slicing the air on its way down. He said, "The bank sent this notice this morning. Someone submitted a power of attorney in your name." I didn't react. My face didn't twitch. My heartbeat didn't change. Only my hand tightened slightly around the blanket. Arthur flipped the first page toward me. There it was, my signature. Or something close. The pen stroke at the top of the H trembled, slightly drifting right, a tiny flaw only 2 kinds of people would notice: someone who knew my signature, and someone trying to forge it. Arthur said, "This was scanned from a document you signed in 2018. Your retirement account, $700,000, is the target." Under the white hospital light, the scanned signature looked like a thin blade dragged across paper. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not longer. Any longer, and the memory of Christmas Eve would pull me back into that suffocating moment. Arthur continued. They didn't get in. The bank flagged irregular metadata on the signature and froze the request. I opened my eyes. Who submitted it? Arthur looked directly at me. Harold. It had to be someone with access to your old records, or the company's archives. Derek, or Vanessa, or both. I didn't say it. I didn't have to. Arthur closed the folder and said firmly, "My advice, do not confront them. Not yet." Before the silence could stretch further, my phone buzzed. "Grace," I answered. "Dad. I just got an alert from the company system. There's a new loan application under Beckett Construction. I assumed you signed it." "I didn't sign anything," I said. Grace inhaled sharply. I could hear the wind from Chicago whipping past her phone. They emailed from the commercial bank, a $150,000 loan file. Someone used your e-signature. I looked at Arthur. His eyes narrowed. Grace continued. I blocked it, requested verification. But if they tried it once, they might try again. I spoke softly. Good work, Grace. Keep every email, every metadata tag. I always do, she said. A short pause. Dad, I'm coming home. I don't feel right about this. I glanced at the clock, 8:47 a.m. Chicago runways were probably freezing over. If I so much as sighed, Grace would be on the next plane. Don't come, I said. Not yet. I heard her swallow her worry. Okay, but Dad, don't let anyone into your room unless Clara's there. I exhaled a tired but proud smile. I promise. The call ended. Arthur let out a long breath. The signs line up. They don't just want your personal assets. They want the entire company. I stared into the empty space in front of me the way you stare at a skyscraper you once built, now being eaten away by termites. 20 minutes later, Clara knocked and stepped in, a printout in her hand. Mr. Beckett. I have the log. I gestured for Arthur to stay. Clara opened the page, and there it was on the third line from the top. 03:14 a.m. ID Derek Beckett. One line, only one, but it landed like a steel stake driven straight into concrete. I didn't lean forward to study it. I looked at it from where I sat to feel the weight of the truth. Arthur clenched his jaw and muttered a curse under his breath. Clara placed the log gently on the tray. The system shows he stayed for 2 minutes and 40 seconds, left before the next round of checks. No medical reason to be here off hours. Arthur asked, and the cameras? The frame was blocked by a rolling cart, but it is recovering the backup. Clara hesitated, then said, What I already knew, Mr. Beckett. This wasn't an accident. I looked at her for a long moment, a look meant to thank her for saying out loud what needed to be said. I know, I replied. Arthur stood and placed a hand on my shoulder. Harold, be careful. People who want money go farther than we expect. I didn't respond. I lifted the printed log, folded it neatly, and set it on the table. Derek. 3 letters. Once the name of my son, now the signature of a plot. I reached for the note I'd written the day before. Truth leaves a trail. I placed the log on top of it. My promise now had its first piece of evidence. A father, sitting in a cold hospital room in the middle of winter, staring at a timestamp, 03:14 a.m., finally understanding. The question was no longer, will he come back? The truth was, he already had, long before that night. I just refused to see it. But now I saw everything, and I wasn't closing my eyes again. The afternoon of December 28th, the last light of day slipped through the hospital window as if someone had dragged a damp cloth across the sky, dim, cold, almost the color of ash. It cast a strange, distorted shadow across the wall, as though the room itself understood something had stepped beyond the boundary of safety. I sat upright, leaning against the headboard. My heart wasn't racing like it had on Christmas Eve, but there was a heaviness in my gut, the same weight you feel when you stand before a building you know is about to be demolished. You can sense the structure is rotten. All that's left is the moment it collapses. And then Arthur returned. This time his footsteps were faster, his breathing tighter, his eyes sharper. The eyes of a man who had just seen the facade of a building peeled back, revealing what rotted underneath. Harold, he said the moment he stepped inside. I know who's behind this. I didn't respond. I simply tilted my head. Go on. Arthur opened his tablet and swiped a few times. A spreadsheet came up filled with transaction codes, internal references, and then a hidden sheet. He tapped unhide. A single column appeared. Name Shadow Ledger. Entries 12 transactions. Total over $430,000. All using old internal company codes. Codes that only 3 people knew, me, Derek, and Vanessa. Arthur spoke, his voice tight with the effort of keeping anger contained. She created a separate bookkeeping system, unreported, invisible. Pulled money out using labels like advisory fee, equipment consultation, insurance adjustments. But every single transaction leads back to one account. He turned the screen toward me. V. Beckett Holdings. I stared at the spreadsheet the way you stare at a crack running down concrete. Small at first, ignored by everyone, but growing quietly, silently until one day it becomes the fracture that brings down an entire building. Arthur continued. And Harold, she was the one who sent the forged POA to the bank, not Derek. Derek was the face, the impulsive one, the greed that anyone could see. But Vanessa, she was the shadow behind it all, a trained accountant, the one who managed the household books for 5 years, a woman who knew exactly where the weak spots were and how to press until the structure gave way. Arthur said, she scanned your signature from a 2018 internal document, sent it through an encrypted email to make it look uniform. Smart, calculated. I closed my eyes, not from fatigue, but because a memory unspooled itself like an old cassette tape stretched thin. A voice note, Vanessa's voice, soft, smooth, sweet the way brown sugar melts on the tongue. Let me handle your paperwork, Dad. Back then, I'd thought it was kindness, efficiency, devotion. But now, hearing it in my head, it sounded like something an arsonist whispers before striking the match. I opened my eyes. No anger left. No shock. Just clarity. Arthur sat down and lowered his voice. When I traced the money's path, I found something else. He hesitated. Vanessa started the shadow ledger exactly 1 week after the construction worker died in 2021. I exhaled long, cold. She wanted to protect herself, I said, and protect her plan from me. Arthur nodded. She knew Derek would never get the company after that accident, but if you slowed down or passed unexpectedly, she would be the legal spouse handling the estate. She'd control everything Derek couldn't. I looked down at my hands that once gripped wrenches and hammers that built scaffolds and rooftops, now trembling lightly like aged wood. Not from age, but because truth sometimes chills deeper than winter steel. The door opened again. Eleanor. Evening light brushed across her silver hair. She carried the faint scent of pine, the same scent that followed us through our earliest winters together. She didn't ask questions, didn't cry, didn't throw her arms around me like a dramatic TV wife. She simply took my hand, a familiar grip, a harbor in the storm. Harold, she said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of witnessing too many fractures in this family, don't let hatred kill you, before the law does what it must. I looked into her eyes. There was disappointment there, fear, pain, the kind a mother feels when she sees her family splinter from within. But there was also hope, a hope that I wouldn't let our son destroy what we spent a lifetime building. I answered slow but solid, I choose justice. Not revenge, not rage, just as truth evidence. A straight, cold road that doesn't require screaming. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out another set of documents. Harold, he said, we need to prepare for the worst-case scenario. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. A will. Wills aren't for dying men. They're for protecting the living. Arthur placed the draft in front of me. The key clause is the criminal exclusion clause. If any heir commits a criminal act against you, they lose everything. Eleanor's hand tightened around mine, not stopping me, not questioning me, standing with me as she had for 40 years. I drew in a long breath through the oxygen tube and looked out the window. Snow was still falling, but softer now, each flake drifting like pale dust from an old memory. Arthur, I said, let's move forward. That decision landed like the first stake driven into the ground when you begin a new foundation, straight, unwavering, irreversible. That afternoon, I knew 3 things. Derek wasn't acting alone. Vanessa had been building this plan brick by brick for years. And now this wasn't a battle between father and son anymore. It was a battle between truth and the shadows behind the curtain. And I had already stepped into the light first. Morning of December 29th. Cold wind slipped through the window frame of room 312, making the curtain tremble as if thin fingers were brushing their way inside. The sky outside was thick and gray, as though all of Winston-Salem had woken from a long, storm-heavy sleep. Inside the room, there were no voices, only the steady metallic hum of the monitor, cold, emotionless. But beneath that mechanical indifference, a decision was about to be made, a decision that could alter the fate of the entire Beckett family. I've lived long enough to understand one thing. When evil hides behind family, it becomes more dangerous than any fist. And to face that kind of danger, you cannot use emotion. You must use law. At 9:12 a.m., the door opened. Arthur walked in. His wool coat still smelled of the cold hallway outside. But this time he didn't wear the burdened look of a man uncovering cruelty. He carried the steady resolve of someone laying a foundation. Behind him came Clara and Jeff Collins, the hospital's administrative manager, the person authorized to serve as a legal witness. In Arthur's hand was a thin, hard-bound packet stamped with the red seal of the North Carolina e-notary office. On the cover, Last Will and Testament of Harold J. Beckett. I looked at the documents the way a builder looks at blueprints for a new structure, a structure I had to erect from ashes to make sure those ashes would never fall on the innocent again. Arthur set the packet on the rolling tray and spoke in a quiet, steel-clear voice. Harold, this is the final line of defense. Clara stood to my left, Jeff stood to my right, both silent like two steel beams holding the room steady while I made the most important decision since the night my son removed my oxygen. Arthur opened to the first page. The will is drafted under North Carolina law through the emergency e-notary process. Everything is expedited but 100% legitimate. He turned to the second page and pointed at a bold section, Criminal Exclusion Clause. Arthur read aloud. If any heir commits a criminal offense, causes intentional harm, attempts to harm or conspires to harm the life, property, or health of Mr. Harold Beckett, that heir shall be fully excluded from all inheritance, assets, shares, and benefits of any form. He lifted his gaze. His eyes met mine, serious, undeniable, and ruthless in the way only the law can be. This means, Arthur said, if Derek or anyone commits a crime against you, they lose everything. No disputes, no appeals, no long court battles, just nothing. I took in a long, slow breath of oxygen, then nodded. Arthur continued, turning to the next section. Margaret Beckett Foundation for Elder Justice. Assets including retirement accounts, savings, the house company shares, fixed property insurance benefits, would be transferred into a foundation named after my mother, Margaret, the woman who spent her entire life saying, protect those who are weaker than you. Arthur explained, the foundation will support elderly victims of financial abuse. No one can dispute it. No one can withdraw from it. No one can exploit it. I closed my eyes. I saw my mother's face. I wondered whether she would hurt to see her grandson fall so far into darkness. Perhaps she would. But she'd also want me to stand tall and fight in the way she raised me to. Arthur held out his phone. Grace is ready for confirmation from Chicago. Her face appeared on the screen, eyes, tired hair pulled back hastily. Dad, she said, I've reviewed the draft. I agree. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise in anger. It carried a calmness sharp as a blade, the kind of calm born from pain that has matured. I confirmed the electronic copy, Grace said. Go ahead, Dad. A small, weary smile tugged at my mouth, the smile of a man who knows he is not alone. Thank you, sweetheart. The call ended. Arthur returned to the table. Harold, all that remains is your signature. Clara rested her hand gently on the bed rail, not to help me sit up, but to steady me. Jeff opened the e-notary system on his tablet and prepared the digital signature field. He handed me the stylus. My hand trembled not from fear, but because this moment carried the weight of the main support beam in a 20-story building. Once I pressed down, there would be no turning back. I signed, each stroke slow, deliberate, firm. Arthur didn't look away from me. Not once. When the final stroke appeared on the screen, I set the stylus down and said, my voice hoarse but clear as the final hammer strike sealing a foundation. Justice is a signature plus time. No one spoke. Clara inhaled deeply. Jeff nodded, confirming his witness role. Arthur saved the notarized file and submitted a copy to the Forsyth County Court through the encrypted network. The entire process took less than 7 minutes, but those 7 minutes completely rewrote the power structure of the Beckett family. Arthur closed his briefcase and said, Harold, now we have Wall's foundation and law. All we need next is evidence. I looked toward the window. The snow had stopped, but ice still clung to the frame, cold, sharp, silent. Evidence will come, I said. My son thinks he's already won, but the ones who think they're the smartest leave the most footprints. Arthur nodded. We're ready. And I nodded back, not the nod of a dying man, but the nod of someone prepared to live long enough to watch the truth collapse every lie. On December 29th, in that cold hospital room, I didn't just sign a will. I signed a survival declaration. And I knew this was only the beginning. December 30th. There was no snowfall, but the sky was so dark and heavy, it felt as if the entire hospital had been swallowed by a slab of frozen stone. No one knew except 3 people that inside room 312 a silent investigation was beginning. No alarms, no police, no interrogations. Just silence and numbers. Numbers that never lie. I started the morning by pressing the call button for Clara. She entered only minutes later, as if she already expected I would need her. Mr. Beckett. Her voice was soft but steady. Clara, I said I want to submit a request for the full oxygen device log and hallway camera logs, through Patient Advocate, by the book. Clara nodded without hesitation. I'll file it right now. Approval takes 24 hours. I gave her a tired smile. I have 24 hours. She held my gaze for a second, a look from someone who understood that time was no longer a clock, but a weapon. She closed the door gently behind her. That soft click felt like the opening shot of a war I could not afford to lose. Arthur arrived close to noon, carrying his laptop and the tight, wind-wired expression of a man preparing for a structural stress test. We begin the technical side, he said, setting the laptop on the tray table. I leaned back, oxygen flowing steadily through the tube. Arthur opened the first file, the legal authorization for the training recorder, a small device integrated into the oxygen monitoring system installed legally to help train staff. It recorded oxygen irregularities, and by law only with patient consent. You agreed in writing, Arthur reminded me. So this data is HIPAA compliant, fully admissible. Good, I answered. I didn't care how the technology worked, only that it worked in my favor. But Arthur knew I needed reassurance that justice had no holes to slip through. Early afternoon, Clara returned. In her hands, a sealed envelope, Patient Advocate response. Mr. Beckett, she said, opening it carefully. Here's the oxygen device log. I looked at the printout, black ink on white paper, crisp as a confession. Third line from the bottom, 03:14:09 a.m., access ID, DK 1127 Derek Beckett. Clara explained. He stayed in the room for nearly 3 minutes. Left before the system reset. Arthur narrowed his eyes, and the camera Clara pulled out the next page. One segment was blocked by a rolling cart. Someone moved it about 15 minutes before Derek's ID scanned. I asked quietly, anyone recognizable? Not clearly, Clara said, but the silhouette looks female, and the boots, the kind Vanessa wears. No one needed to say anything more. The missing puzzle piece slid into its place. Arthur typed rapidly on his keyboard. Harold. This wasn't impulsive. This was a plan. I looked toward the window. The pine branches outside swayed gently, a reminder that even in winter, some things cannot be hidden. By late afternoon, the hospital's IT department sent the restored backup clip. Clara and Arthur played it on the tablet. Grainy, distorted, but enough. A shadow entered the hallway 03:13 a.m. Derek, no mistaking him. Broad shoulders, that hurried forward lean, the slight bend of his left elbow, a posture he'd had since he was a boy. 8 seconds later, the frame glitched right as he passed the area where the rolling cart blocked the lens. But when IT recovered the final pixels, his silhouette appeared again at the end of the hall, just as the system logged Derek's keycard entering my room. Arthur exhaled sharply through his nose. Enough for unlawful entry. Strong foundation for attempted harm. I didn't respond. I simply stared at the blurry outline of my son, a darkness I'd tried to shield for 30 years. Now that same darkness was suffocating me. At 6:00 p.m., my phone vibrated. Grace. I answered immediately. Her voice came through steady but burning with controlled anger. Dad, I have the financial report. Arthur tilted his head to hear. Grace continued. I found a transfer of $210,000 to an account named V. Beckett Holdings. Every transfer uses old company codes Vanessa set up. Arthur scribbled notes. Grace went on, and there's a $15,000 consulting fee sent to an unregistered account in Charlotte. No contract, no memo, no documentation. I asked, what do you think it is? Grace didn't hesitate. Money laundering. A buffer fund, or payment to someone helping them falsify documents. My chest tightened not from oxygen loss, but from the impact of hearing the truth naked and raw. Grace continued, I locked all financial access. Nobody can use the old company codes again. I looked at Arthur. He nodded. That was a move she learned from me. Block. Lock. Cut the supply. Grace's voice softened but trembled beneath the surface. Dad, they want everything. Not just money, not just the company, but the life of the one person standing in their way. I closed my eyes for a moment. I know. The call ended. When the room was quiet again, Arthur looked at me. Harold, every piece lines up. The finances, the logs, the camera, the motive, the behavior. I sat still. The warmth of oxygen flowing into my lungs only made the truth feel colder. I whispered not to hide it, but to hear it clearly from my own mouth. He will come back, at the same hour. Arthur didn't correct me, Clara didn't argue, because they both knew a person who attempts harm and fails always returns to finish the job. I stared down the hallway. The light at the far end flickered, not illuminating anyone, just shining on the darkness as if warning us that it was moving. The silent investigation had begun, and I would be waiting when he came back. The first morning of the new year, January 1st, 2025. Outside the window of room 312, melted snow slid down the glass in long, uneven streaks like cracks spreading across a concrete wall after an earthquake. No more holiday cheer. No more Christmas music, only the thick, suffocating quiet of a year that had opened with a truth too cold to forget. I was taking slow sips of water when the door opened without a knock. Derek, a bouquet of expensive flowers in his right hand, his left tucked in his pocket as if trying to hide a discomfort he couldn't quite mask. He walked in with the same posture he had when he was 5, the posture of a child about to ask forgiveness for something unforgivable. But his eyes weren't the eyes of a child anymore. They were the eyes of a grown man who had committed a crime, but wasn't sure whether he had been caught. Derek stopped exactly 1 meter from my bed. He forced a smile. Dad, I'm sorry. I've been stressed. The company, things at home, Vanessa. I just lost control a little. I looked at the flowers in his hand. No scent, no life, just like his apology. I didn't answer immediately. I let several seconds pass, long enough for the silence to settle heavily across the room. Then I spoke, my voice weak but sharpened like a thin saw blade. If you want to help me, don't touch my retirement funds. Derek froze. His lips twitched. His fingers tightened around the bouquet. He hadn't expected me to know. Hadn't thought I'd seen the forged signature. Hadn't imagined I understood the entire plan he and Vanessa had constructed over months. A strike doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to hit the right spot. Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His jaw tightened like a steel cable pulled taut. Dad, you're misunderstanding, he stammered. Am I said, eyes locked on his. Because I think you're stressed. Worried the 2021 case will reopen. That was the second strike. Sharper, deeper, and again no need to raise my voice. He swallowed hard, turned his face away for half a second, the reflex of a man who feels cold, sweat forming but is trying desperately not to show it. I knew the rumors had reached him. Forsyth County detectives had started reviewing the 2021 scaffolding death. The case had never truly closed, and Derek knew that if investigators found the hidden ledger Grace uncovered or the suspicious transactions Vanessa created, then he wouldn't stay free, and he couldn't risk me living long enough to talk. A faint draft slipped through the door frame, stirring the curtain almost like a warning. Clara stepped into the room at that moment. She glanced at Derek, then at me, and placed a new schedule sheet on the table. Mr. Beckett, she said plainly, starting tonight the 3:00 a.m. check will be reinforced. I'll be on duty. She didn't say it for me. She said it for him. Derek glanced at the paper. I saw his pupils contract, a tiny reflex he couldn't hide. He understood. Clara would be there. At that hour. Derek tried to smile again. I just want you to know I worry about you, Dad. Clara straightened hands by her sides, unmoving. Good, she said. Then don't enter the patient rooms outside visiting hours. A soft warning. But to Derek, it landed like a steel barricade. He turned back to me, forcing another smile. Rest well, Dad. I'll be back. I answered, I know. A simple sentence, but spoken the way only a father betrayed by his son can say it. A sentence that sounded both like acceptance and prediction. Derek left the room, but before stepping through the door, he swept his gaze across the room. Not at me, not at Clara, but at the corners, the angles, the blinds, the ceiling fixtures. He was calculating. Cameras, blind spots, paths. That wasn't the look of a repentant man. It was the look of someone deciding to do the final thing. The look of someone telling himself, if I don't do it tonight, there won't be another chance. When he was gone, Clara turned to me. Do you want me to call security? Not yet, I said. She frowned, but she understood. I didn't want him to run. I wanted him to trip, right where he thought he had erased every footprint. Later that afternoon, Robert Nash, the head of security, stepped into the doorway. He didn't enter fully, as if the hallway shadows could overhear. Mr. Beckett, Robert said in a low voice, I'll keep a rapid response unit within 30 seconds of your room. He won't see them. Good. I can't enter the room constantly, he'd notice, but both cameras have been adjusted, and the rolling cart has been locked in place. No one will move it again. I looked into Robert's eyes, the eyes of a man who spent 20 years as a police officer. They said, I know this kind of man, and this time, he's not getting away. Robert slipped out like a shadow. I lay back against the pillows, pulling the blanket to my chest. I didn't sleep. I thought about Christmas Eve, about the breath that stopped, about Derek's voice. This is your last breath, old man. And I understood something with perfect clarity. Men like Derek, when they want something and fail to get it, always return to finish what they started. I stared at the thin streak of reflected light on the ceiling and whispered to myself, he'll come back. At the same hour. It wasn't a warning, not a threat. It was a confirmation, a truth as cold as steel, and I would not let the second time be the last. January 2nd, 2025, just before dawn. Outside the window of room 312, the storm raged violently, lightning tearing through the sky like silver blades slicing the dark in half. Each time it flashed, I caught my own reflection in the glass, distorted, blurred, a man suspended between two fates, surviving or dying at the hands of his own son. I lay still, staring at the ceiling. My chest rose and fell with the oxygen flowing into my nose, but my throat was raw, because I knew tonight he would return. 2:48 a.m. I opened my eyes a sliver, checking the clock. The second hand glided across the dial like the breath of time itself, slow, cold, unpitying. Clara was on overnight duty in Wing 3B. Robert was positioned within 30 seconds of my door. The training recorder was reactivated legally this time, writing everything to a secure archive. But Derek didn't know that. And most importantly, he was confident. The most confident ones always leave the biggest footprints. 55 a.m. The rain struck harder, sharp and rhythmic, like fingers tapping the lid of a coffin. The whole hospital was drowned in silence. Only an occasional ventilator sounded faintly down the hall, thin, fragile, like a weak prayer. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, to wait. 4 nights earlier, at this exact hour, I almost died. Tonight, I wanted him to die in the legal sense. My breaths slowed shallow and steady, as if I had drifted into deep sleep. 2:58 a.m. A small, distinct click broke the silence. Not the wind, not footsteps, not the settling of the building. A key card. At my door. I didn't open my eyes, but every sense sharpened like a blade. The door eased open, slow, deliberate. A figure slipped inside. No dramatic music, no sharp inhale, no words. Only the soft sound of rain dripping from his jacket onto the floor. Derek. No flowers, no apologetic smile, no pretense, just his true nature, the one he'd buried under 2 years of excuses. He paused in the dark, letting his eyes adjust. I heard his breath tinged with cheap alcohol and the sour smell of a wet raincoat. He stepped to the monitor. A faint beep. He muted the alarms. Exactly as he had on Christmas Eve. Not a single move different. But tonight, his actions couldn't erase the log. The machine was recording every single touch. He moved toward my bed. Lightning flashed through the window, lighting half his face, sunken eyes, cracked lips, and an expression twisted with exhaustion, mania, and desperation. His voice dripped disdain. You know, you really should have signed earlier. My heart clenched. Not from fear, from recognition. That was the same sentence he used when he tried to end me the first time. Derek lifted his hand and pulled the oxygen tube free. No hesitation, no tremor. Air stopped instantly like a steel door slamming shut inside my chest. I forced myself not to react, kept my face slack, my breathing shallow, hiding the cough burning in my throat. He whispered, "You've disappointed me long enough. Tonight, I fix everything." Each word felt like a drill pressing into bone. 30:31 a.m., exactly the moment Clara and I had set. My hand, limp like a sedated patient, slipped toward the bed rail. My thumb pressed the emergency call button. Once. A single press, but it was the heartbeat separating survival from murder. Derek jerked. He knew that even when alarms were muted in-room, the signal still reached the nurse's station. He looked toward the door, then back at me. He realized he only had seconds left. He leaned closer, voice tightening. "Do you really think you've won?" "You haven't." But he didn't know the training recorder had been programmed to automatically replay the previous suspicious audio for system calibration. A tiny click. Then, "This is your last breath, old man." His own voice. The exact sentence he said during the first attempt. It rang through the room like a knife clattering onto steel. Not the old recording the system's autoplay function triggered by Clara's setup, fully legal. Derek stumbled backward, face draining of color. What? What is that?" His legal downfall began at that precise second. 03:01:50 a.m. The door slammed open. Clara rushed in first, her white coat snapping behind her eyes, sharp as a scalpel. Right behind her, Robert Nash. Gloves, tactical flashlight, evidence pouches clipped at his belt. "Don't move." Robert barked, the voice of a former cop who'd seen every kind of nightmare. Derek froze. No time to act, no time to pretend, no time to lie. Clara reached me first. Two swift motions reattached the oxygen tube, checked my vitals. She moved so fast I barely noticed the return of air to my lungs. Robert stepped between us. "Mr. Derek Beckett," he said firmly. "Your actions are being documented for immediate report." Derek stammered. I didn't." Robert cut him off. He unhooked the training recorder, checked the log, and sealed it in an evidence pouch. "This device is now official evidence. It goes straight to Detective Marla Jensen." Derek stared at the sealed pouch like it was a tightening noose. I opened my eyes. The overhead light stung, but I wanted to see him clearer than ever. I lifted my head. Clara helped support me. I looked at my son. The boy who once called me his hero at 6, now twisted into something unrecognizable. My voice was hoarse, thin from lack of air, but edged with cold clarity. "You just wrote your own indictment." Derek's mouth opened. No sound came out. His face paled. His eyes reddened, not from remorse, from losing. Robert blocked the exit. "You are not leaving this room," he said. "Detective Jensen has been notified." Derek collapsed into a chair, head dropping as if his spirit had been ripped out. Clara placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now. Truly safe." I didn't answer. I looked toward the window, the storm hammering the glass. Tonight wasn't the night Derek killed me. Tonight was the night I killed the lie. The night every footprint he thought he hid lit up under the storm's glare. The night the rain, the wind, and the silence bore witness justice was coming. Very, very close. Morning of January 2nd, 2025. The first sunlight of the year spilled across the hospital window, not warm, not golden, just a pale, chalky glow that made everything in room 312 look dusted with frost. I had survived the most terrifying night of my life, a night when my son tried to kill me for the second time, and a night when finally the truth stepped out of the shadows. I lay still, my chest aching from the minutes without oxygen, but my mind wasn't on the pain. It was on what was coming. 09:10 a.m. The door swung open. A woman walked in, dark blue suit hair pulled back, eyes sharp and calm. The kind of person who didn't need to raise her voice to let everyone know she carried authority. Detective Marla Jensen, Forsyth County Major Crimes, the same detective who cracked 2 elder abuse cases back in 2023. She didn't shake hands, didn't smile, didn't waste time. She pulled a chair to my bedside and opened her notebook. "Mr. Beckett, I've reviewed the overnight report." "Let's begin." Arthur stood beside me, hands clasped. Clara lingered near the door. Robert positioned himself behind her broad like a wall. Marla said simply, "I need to hear the recording." Arthur opened the evidence pouch and handed her the training recorder. She put on the headphones, closed her eyes, and pressed play. The room went silent, so silent that even the rain outside seemed to stop as Derek's voice came through the device. "This is your last breath, old man." Marla opened her eyes. No shock, no gasp, just one crisp line written into her notebook. Confession captured. Intent confirmed. "Next," she said. "Access logs." Clara handed her the printouts. Marla scanned the page, circling the timestamps in red. 03:14 a.m. first attempt. 03:00 a.m. second attempt. "Matches," she said. "Undeniable." Then Robert opened his laptop and played the partially restored hallway footage. The image was grainy but unmistakable. 02:59 a.m. Derek enters the hallway. 03:00 a.m. He approaches the door of room 312. 03:03 a.m. He exits, walking fast, looking back twice. Marla nodded and added, "Presence confirmed. Opportunity confirmed. Attempt repeated." She turned to Arthur. "Financials." Arthur slid his tablet toward her. First page, the shadow ledger. Second, unauthorized transfers. Third, V, Beckett Holdings. Marla frowned. Suspicious. "We'll file it." Then she stood. "That's enough. I'll issue the arrest." But the door burst open. Vanessa, hair disheveled, snow on her coat makeup, smeared like someone who had spent the night panicking in the dark. "Where's Derek? What are you doing to him?" Her voice was shrill, half genuine fear, half performance. Marla asked, "You're Vanessa Beckett?" "Yes, I can explain. It's all a misunderstanding." Derek was stressed. Everything at home, at work, he just lost control. Arthur cut in calm as a blade. "Stress is not a legal excuse for attempted murder. Twice." Vanessa's eyes widened, throat tightening. "You don't understand. He was only trying to check the equipment." "The hospital misunderstood," Marla replied, cold. "The hospital didn't misunderstand a recording, a camera and an ID log." Vanessa's mouth fell open, but Arthur wasn't done. He opened the e-notary packet and turned to the page with the boldest clause. He set it on the table in front of her criminal exclusion clause. Arthur read it aloud, word by word. "Any heir who commits a criminal act against Mr. Harold Beckett shall be removed from all inheritance assets and financial benefit." Vanessa froze as if someone had punched the air from her lungs. Her lips quivered, her jaw shook. She looked at me, then at Robert, then at Marla, and she understood every exit was closed. "You can't do this," she screamed. Arthur said calmly, "I can. Because this is Mr. Beckett's legal directive, properly notarized, witnessed, and filed with the Forsyth County Court." Vanessa's voice cracked into sobbing panic. "Derek, he didn't mean it. He just wanted—" I cut her off, slow, weak, but sharp enough to slice through the noise. "He wanted me dead." Vanessa's voice died in her throat. The door opened again. 2 officers stepped in, Derek between them. His hands shook. His face was bloodless. His eyes were wide, not with remorse, but with terror. "Dad," he whispered, breaking. Please tell them. Please give me one more chance. I'll change. I swear. I turned my head away. Not because I hated him, because I had finally seen enough. Eleanor stepped forward, my wife placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Her voice was warm, soft, a breath across an old wound. "Harold, sometimes letting go is a form of love." I closed my eyes. A tear slid down, not for Derek. Eleanor was right. I had let go. Let go of the belief that I could protect a son who didn't want to save himself. Detective Marla approached Derek. She took out the cuffs. Her voice was steady, professional, and devastating. "Derek Beckett, you are under arrest for attempted first-degree murder, unlawful entry, elder abuse, and financial fraud." Derek collapsed into the chair. Vanessa shrieked, "No! He was just trying to." Marla continued, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." The click of the handcuffs echoed through the room. Sharp, metallic final. That sound felt like the ending punctuation of the darkest chapter of my life. Clara's hand rested on my shoulder. Robert stood guard at the door. Derek was led away. Vanessa crumpled. Arthur said nothing he didn't need to. I looked out the window. The snow had stopped. The light was brighter, but my heart felt like a steel beam driven deep into fresh concrete. Justice had begun its work, and it began with the cold shine of handcuffs. Late January 2025, Mercy General had settled back into its usual rhythm, the soft tapping of nurses' shoes on polished floors, the steady beep of monitors, the familiar fluorescent lights no longer flickering from winter storms. But room 312 was different now. It wasn't the place where I almost died. It was the place where justice began. I was being discharged that morning. I packed slowly, the kind of slow you choose when you want a moment to stretch, to breathe, to take in what almost slipped away. The TV on the wall played WRAL like it always did. But today, the morning news wasn't talking about weather, traffic, or temperature. It was talking about me and about Derek. A news anchor filled the screen, studio lights glinting off her hair. WRL investigates a son's greed, a father's justice. My hands stilled over my folded shirt. Eleanor paused, too, mid-button on my coat. The anchor continued. Shocking developments in Winston-Salem, as 34-year-old Derek Beckett faces charges of attempted murder against his father, Harold J. Beckett, founder of Beckett Construction Group. The screen shifted. A photo of me in the hospital bed, Clara reconnecting my oxygen. A photo of Derek in handcuffs, his face, pale eyes swollen. The report shifted into a documentary tone. Evidence includes recorded threats, access logs, hallway camera footage, and suspicious financial transfers connected to V. Beckett Holdings. Eleanor rested her hand on mine. I breathed in slowly. Not with pain, not with anger, but with the strange heaviness of witnessing a home you once built being peeled open wall by wall to reveal what had been rotting inside. The anchor continued. Across Winston-Salem, residents are speaking out about rising elder abuse, often within families. The Beckett case has sparked conversations throughout the community. Cut to interviews outside a coffee shop. A man said no one saw it coming. Derek was supposed to take over the business. A woman sighed. Families hide things like this. Mr. Beckett is lucky to be alive. My chest tightened. Not from shame, not from grief, but from knowing I was no longer a silent victim. I was evidence. A knock sounded on the door. Mark Ellison stepped inside. My colleague for more than 25 years, the man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with me in summer heat, and the last builder I knew who still believed in one rule: never cover a mistake with silence. He wore a brown jacket damp from drizzle. "Harold," he murmured, voice thick. I nodded for him to sit. Mark watched the broadcast a moment, then looked at me. "You holding up I'm still alive," I said. "That's enough," he replied softly. He clasped his work-worn hands, knuckles scarred from decades of construction, and then he spoke slowly, like a man digging up a buried beam. He should have exposed years ago. There's something from 2021, something I kept to myself, but I can't anymore. I stared into his eyes. Mark inhaled deeply. Derek. He hit a crucial report about the scaffold collapse. I didn't move. He continued. The safety net engineering report, it said the failure happened because Derek ignored the locking procedure. I remembered. The accident. Brick dust hanging in the air. A worker carried out under a white sheet. And Derek telling me, voice trembling, "Dad, the equipment failed." It wasn't my fault. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. And I paid $200,000 to settle with the family, thinking I was saving Derek from a lifetime of being marked with guilt. Mark swallowed hard. He asked me to store the report in the old garage. He never took it back. Harold, he used your trust. He wanted to leverage it so you'd hand him the company. I closed my eyes. Inside me, something collapsed quietly, silently, like a building brought down by a perfectly placed charge. I whispered I thought I was saving him, but I was feeding the worst part of him. Mark looked away, ashamed. I'm sorry I stayed silent. I put my hand on his. Speaking now is still on time. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, thin, cold, lonely. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with a late confession from someone whose conscience finally woke up. 10 minutes later, Arthur entered, no knock urgency written on his face. But this time, his eyes carried something different. A glimmer. A small victory. "Harold," he said, opening his case file, "the Forsyth County Court just approved my request." He held up a document, the red seal glowing like a stamp of iron. Order for temporary financial restraint. The second clause read, "All transactions involving V. Beckett Holdings are frozen, including withdrawals, transfers, assets, securities, and subaccounts. Effective immediately. Vanessa, Derek, they couldn't touch a single cent now." Arthur's voice rang like a hammer striking steel. "Your assets are protected. The court has shut down their entire financial pipeline permanently." I nodded. No smile, no exhale of triumph, no thrill of revenge. Just the deep, solid feeling of a column finally anchored into the foundation, firm, steady, unmovable. Mark squeezed my shoulder. "Harold, you survived. Now it's time for you to win." Eleanor stood beside me, her voice warm but edged with old sorrow. "Justice may come late, Harold, but it comes." I looked back at the TV where the headline still lingered. "A son's greed, a father's justice." I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a martyr. I wasn't untouchable. I was simply a father who chose truth even when truth shattered his heart. And sometimes a broken heart is exactly what justice needs to build something stronger. April 2025. Spring in Winston-Salem had a quiet kind of beauty, not loud, not blooming wildly, but a tender green rising from bare branches like old wounds slowly stitching closed. I stood in front of the new company building, not large, not flashy, just clean, bright, and honest. More honest than any office I'd ever owned. Fresh paint on the signboard carried the scent of cut wood. Beckett Restoration Group Safety. Integrity. Restoration. Those 3 words weren't a slogan. They were a vow, a compass, a guardrail, a promise to myself about the life I wanted to rebuild. And the person walking toward me now, backpack over one shoulder, eyes determined, steps steady, was the reason this vow mattered at all. Grace. My daughter. The child who left Winston to chase architecture and came home exactly when the family needed her most. She put her bag down and hugged me longer than usual, tight grounding reel. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm home." I took her shoulders gently, looked straight into her eyes. "I know," I said, "and I'm glad." Grace gave me a tired but bright smile. I turned in my resignation in Chicago. From now on, I want to build something that's worth building. We walked into the new office, polished concrete floors, pale wooden ceiling, a small meeting table at the center. No trophies, no oversized construction photos. We were starting over, small, clean, honest. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a stainless steel key, the office key I'd carried for more than 30 years. I placed it into her hand. "Take the lead," I said. Grace blinked. "Dad, are you sure?" "Absolutely." I pointed to the sign outside. "You'll build with something I forgot for a long time, integrity." Grace closed her fingers around the key as if she were accepting a responsibility bigger than running a company. "I'll do better than you," she whispered. I smiled softly. That's the point. But spring didn't bring only new beginnings. It brought judgments, too. On April 23rd, Arthur arrived at my house with a thick yellow envelope. He set it on the table and said plainly, "Harold, the court has ruled." I nodded once. "Read it." He opened the first page. Derek Beckett sentencing order. 4 years probation. 18 months of intensive supervision. Permanent ban from working in the construction industry. Arthur paused. If he violates anything, probation becomes prison. I sat still. I didn't feel joy, or triumph, or anger. Just a quiet sadness, but layered with clarity. I couldn't save him, I said. But I saved others from him. Arthur turned to the next document. Vanessa Beckett, plea agreement, 2 years probation, permanent ban from financial management, ordered to leave North Carolina within 30 days. I exhaled. "Where will she go, South Dakota?" Arthur replied. Her mother sighed. I didn't say more. Some people, leaving is the only right thing they can do. Arthur laid the final document in front of me, the one that mattered most. A seal from the North Carolina Charitable Oversight Office transfer execution. Margaret Beckett Foundation for Elder Justice. Your assets have been transferred, Arthur said, as the will specifies. And that means I asked quietly. It means this: even if Derek appeals, even if Vanessa finds a lawyer, even if they try every trick in the book. Arthur put his pen down, looked me squarely in the eye. They will never touch a single dollar. Not ever. A soft spring breeze came through the open window, lifting the edge of the document, letting it fall again like a sigh. I nodded. Good. May arrived. The launch ceremony for the Margaret Beckett Foundation for Elder Justice was held in a small lakeside hall in Salem. Pinewood decorations, warm amber lights, guests who understood exactly what this mission meant. Social workers, community, lawyers, advocates fighting financial abuse against seniors. On stage stood a polished oak plaque in honor of Eleanor Beckett, who taught us to protect the vulnerable. I stayed in the back row, hands folded, heart heavy but steady. I didn't want attention. I only wanted to witness. Grace stepped onto the stage in a pale blue blazer, microphone in hand. She spoke clearly. Today is not just the start of a foundation. It is how my family, and especially my father, gives the world back something right. She touched the plaque honoring her mother. My mother Eleanor taught us that money can build houses, but integrity keeps those houses standing. Applause filled the hall. Arthur leaned closer to me and whispered, "Harold, you've done what many can't. You chose the harder road, the honest one." I didn't answer. I just looked at the plaque. Eleanor. The woman who left too soon was standing on that stage today in the most beautiful way she ever could. My eyes stung, not from anger, not from grief, but from a quiet truth. Even after death, Eleanor saved someone, and this time, that someone was me. When the ceremony ended, everyone filed out, but I stayed. Back row, silent hall, pinewood scent, warm lights, whispers of early summer drifting in. I looked at the plaque one last time. Eleanor, I whispered, everything is back where it belongs. A breeze swept in from the lake. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in many months, I felt peace. Not because I forgot, but because I had walked through it all. November 28, 2025. Early winter in Winston-Salem has a beauty that never demands attention. It doesn't roar. It doesn't dazzle. It simply waits and reveals itself to anyone who steps outside at 6 in the morning and watches their breath turn into smoke, as if the season is testing how alive they still are. I sat on the old wooden chair under the porch roof, the same chair Eleanor used to complain hurts my back if I sit too long, yet somehow it became her favorite spot to read the Sunday paper. In front of me, the yard was fading into late autumn brown. A few stubborn red maple leaves still turned gently in the wind, and in my hand my first cup of hot coffee of the day. I lifted it, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. A year ago, I held a cup just like this in room 312 of Mercy General oxygen tubes still in my nose and my son being led away in handcuffs. Back then, I drank coffee to stay awake. This year, I drink it to remind myself I survived. The door opened softly behind me. Grace stepped out, wrapped in a mint-colored scarf, carrying another steaming cup. "Dad," she said gently, "yours went cold." I looked down. She was right. The heat was gone, not because of the winter air, but because I had been lost in thought too long. Grace placed the warm cup into my hands and sat beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. We both inherited that from Eleanor, the understanding that silence sometimes carries more truth than 1,000 words. From the living room, the radio announcer's voice floated out, steady, warm, touched by holiday cheer. Breaking this morning, the Margaret Beckett Foundation for Elder Justice has officially opened its second branch in Asheville, operational starting early December. Grace listened closely. I stared at the yard, but every word struck my chest like a slow, heavy echo. Asheville, a second branch, Eleanor's name, the purpose I had spent an entire year fighting for. Everything that happened, Derek, Vanessa, the 2021 accident, the hospital, the trial, the WRAL report, the will, everything led to the sentence the radio had just spoken. A moment Eleanor once said would only come to those who know how to wait. Grace touched my shoulder softly. "You heard that, didn't you?" "Of course," I replied. She smiled, tired but glowing like a small lamp in a long night. "Mom would be proud," she said. Those words made something tighten in my throat. I swallowed it down. We listened to the wind moving through the pines behind the house. Winter wind is different, sharper, finer, like a craftsman polishing an old stone just enough for it to show its shine. Grace set her cup down and turned toward me. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about this past year." I nodded for her to continue. "I watched you almost die. I watched my brother get handcuffed. I watched Mom be honored. I watched the company be reborn." I let her speak. She needed to say this. And I realized something. Grace looked right at me, eyes steady, deep honest enough to see through bone. "I don't want to grow old and forget the lessons you gave me." I set my coffee down slowly. Some sentences from our children stay inside us forever. This was one of them. I didn't answer immediately. I simply held her hand, letting my warmth move into hers. After a moment, I said, "Grace, the right lessons cling to us the way light clings to water. You can't hold it, but you also can't lose it." She nodded, eyes shining. I looked toward the yard where the last leaves trembled. Not from fear, but like they were whispering goodbye. I stood and walked into the living room where Eleanor's photograph hung by the window. She was smiling in it, flower on her hands, a moment I captured one March afternoon in 1997 while she baked apple pie and we argued playfully about who was washing the dishes. We both laughed in the end. I stared at the picture, not at her, but at myself, behind the memory, a younger version, hopeful, unaware of the day he would nearly lose everything. I whispered, "Finally, we're at peace, Eleanor. Peace not because things went back to how they were, not because Derek was sentenced, not because the foundation was expanding, but because I had walked the road she wanted me to walk, choosing justice over anger, truth over denial, strength over surrender. That was all she ever asked of me. And today, I could finally say I did it." When I returned to the porch, Grace was still there, holding her cup like a warm memory. I sat down beside her and drew a long breath. The cold wind slipped through my coat, but inside me a small flame still burned, the flame of survival, of justice found, of losses that finally meant something. I gazed out across the yard and spoke softly, evenly, like a storyteller reaching the last line of a long, painful chapter. "Justice doesn't need noise." I paused. "It arrives through truth and patience." A long silence followed. Then I spoke the final lesson of my life. Some endings don't break you. Some endings save your life. And now to you watching or listening from wherever you are, your car, your living room, your quiet porch, your late-night kitchen, I say this. If you believe justice can be silent but powerful, if you believe truth has its own way of finding the light, share this story. It might save someone you love. Thank you for staying with me till the end. This is where my story closes.